Ned Stark watched from the ramparts of the Red Keep as pale morning light spread over King's Landing. The city stirred slowly, the cries of fishmongers and dock workers drifting on a salt-tinged breeze. Far below, the bustle of men, horses, and the occasional cart signaled the day's first rush of commerce. But Ned's mind was not on trade. The horizon was empty of sails now. He could see none just yet. But within days, Stannis Baratheon was expected to arrive with a fleet of war galleys. The letters made it clear that Stannis came to press his claim to the Iron Throne. Ned leaned forward, his fingers gripping the cold stone parapet. Early morning dew clung to the battlements. He remembered his final conversation with King Robert, the smell of wine on his breath and the boar's tusk wound roped in bandages that did little to contain the mortal ruin. He had promised Robert he would protect the realm and Robert's children. But that promise had taken a form Robert would never have guessed. Cersei's children, no children of Robert's at all, confined to their quarters awaiting judgment. The golden-haired boy who would have been crowned king had proven to be Jaime Lannister's get, not Robert's. Now, the queen herself was under a guarded watch in Maegor's Holdfast. A wary stalemate had settled over the Red Keep. He glanced aside at Ser Barristan Selmy, who stood silently at his right, still wearing the pristine white cloak of the Kingsguard. Barristan had turned out to be a staunch ally in seeking the truth, and Ned was grateful beyond words. That said, the old knight never let it show. He bore his duties like a leaden cloak, aware that at any moment they might demand his sword. "They say Stannis is less than a week away," Ned said softly, half to himself. Barristan gave a slight nod. A day or two behind the timeline in his last Raven, but only a day or two, if that. Ships can be delayed by wind or tide. He could appear on the horizon at any time, my lord. Ned exhaled. The worst part of this uneasy calm was not knowing how the lords of the realm would align once Stannis was at the city gates. With Cersei arrested and Joffrey's claim discredited, some houses had pledged to stand by the protector of the realm, by Ned, until the rightful king was found. Others held back, waiting to see who emerged on top. The largest threat loomed from the west. Tywin Lannister had mustered an army. Word from Ravens suggested he was on the march, heading east across the Riverlands. Even if King's Landing stood firm, it risked being surrounded. War hovered like a thundercloud waiting to break. Ned turned away from the view. "Let's go inside. The day's councils will begin soon enough." They descended a narrow staircase into the Red Keep's interior. Guards saluted as Ned passed. In the past few weeks, Ned's presence in the Red Keep had changed. He was no longer the uneasy hand serving under a dying king, nor the near prisoner in a city governed by the Lannisters. He was now the highest authority present, the protector, uncomfortably carrying that burden as he tried to avoid civil war. In the halls, servants and lesser courtiers bowed lower than before, but Ned took no pleasure from it. He and Barristan reached the council chamber, a large room ordinarily reserved for the small council. But many more lords and representatives had crowded into King's Landing these days, forcing them to use a larger space. Torches bracketed the walls, leaving the center well lit with open windows that let in the early sun. Already, a handful of men stood around discussing rumors and alliances. Littlefinger was there, wearing his customary mocking smile, and with him was Varys, who drifted like a shadow. Renly Baratheon leaned against a table, arms crossed, while Mace Tyrell spoke to him in hushed, urgent tones. Lisa Arryn had not come in person, but a pair of the Vale's higher nobles, Ser Vardis Egen among them, hovered to one side, representing the Ares' interests. At a far table, 3 Dornish envoys in flowing robes made a subdued show of ignoring everyone else. When Ned entered, the conversation quieted. He moved to the head of the table, where a solid oak chair had been placed for him, though the seat of the hand was still there as well, vacant. He took a moment to survey them all. "My lords," he began, "we await the arrival of Stannis Baratheon, elder brother to the late King Robert, rightful heir if Joffrey Baratheon's claim is indeed false." Mace Tyrell cleared his throat. "Lord Stark, we grow concerned. We have heard troubling tidings from the west. Tywin Lannister's army has marched into the Riverlands, sacking some of House Tully's holdings along the Red Fork. The Tyrells have no love for the Lannisters, but if open war breaks out, we must consider the safety of the roads and the supply lines to King's Landing. Ned grimaced. He'd received the same ravens. Yes, Tywin has chosen to move, it seems, in retribution for the charges laid against his daughter and grandchildren. My father-in-law, Hoster Tully, is gravely ill, or so I hear. My brother-in-law, Edmure, is mustering forces at Riverrun. They may try to bar Tywin's army from crossing the Trident. Still, we do not know Tywin's full intention. He might march on King's Landing itself. Renly lifted a brow. He's testing your resolve, Ned. He knows that you hold the Queen and the children. If Tywin can threaten from the west, he may force you to release them or to recant your accusation. Ned set his jaw. That is not an option. Mace Tyrell spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. Then Tywin will continue his warpath unless you find a way to counter him. The realm cannot be asked to wait on Stannis forever. If war is begun in earnest, we must have a king on the throne, not merely a protector. Ned spared a glance at Renly, but the younger Baratheon kept his counsel. Renly had made it known he would claim the throne if Stannis refused to come or if the realm deemed Stannis unfit. But for now he abided by Ned's demand to wait. Varys offered a thin smile. Such talk of war is unsettling, is it not? Perhaps there may yet be a solution that secures peace. Lady Cersei and her children remain in your custody, Lord Stark. Might you use them as hostages to bargain terms with Tywin, ensuring he withdraws? Ned suspected this suggestion was precisely what Tywin wanted, but he despised the notion of trading children's lives like coins. I will not hand them over to Tywin. If I do, it only validates the notion that a violent advance garners rewards. Nor will I allow them to be harmed. Robert would never have wanted that. Renly gave a soft snort. You are indeed a man of principle, Ned. He turned toward the gathered lords, raising his voice a notch. But principle alone may not hold Tywin at bay. For every day we delay, Edmure Tully's lands are ravaged. House Frey might waver in its loyalty if the Lannisters offer them better terms. The Riverlands have enough trouble as it is. Littlefinger spoke, leaning forward with the faintest smile on his lips. We could send an envoy to Tywin, proposing a parley. I know the man. He is proud but not foolish. If he sees that we hold his daughter and his grandchildren, however they were conceived, he may be induced to negotiate a truce. And, as you say, Lord Stark, no harm would come to them in the meantime. Ned took in a slow breath. We can try, though I doubt Lord Tywin's willingness to negotiate. He might well demand unconditional release, or else he'll threaten to burn the Riverlands to ash. That is no real negotiation. Peter shrugged. Sometimes even a facade of negotiation buys us time. It might give Stannis a chance to arrive before Tywin can muster a siege. Ned's eyes flicked to Barristan, who remained standing like a sentinel behind him. The old knight said nothing, but the look in his eyes was that of a man who wished for any path that prevented bloodshed. At length, Ned nodded. Very well. Let us send a raven to Tywin, inviting him or his envoys to a parley outside the city's walls, once Stannis arrives. If Tywin refuses, we will know his aim is war. No one voiced open disagreement. The conversation turned to smaller matters. Provisions for the city, the readiness of the gold cloaks, the question of how to keep King's Landing calm if Stannis marched in with a large force. Eventually, the meeting dissolved, the lords trickling out to their own corners of the keep. Ned told Littlefinger to begin drafting the letter for Tywin, with the official seal of the Protector of the Realm, while Varys promised to arrange for safe messenger routes. When the chamber was nearly empty, Renly lingered. He paced across the flagstones, looking pensive. Ned, there's something you should consider. Once Stannis arrives, he might demand you hand the Queen and her children over to him. Stannis' sense of justice is absolute. He might see their continued survival as a threat to his rightful rule. Ned folded his arms. He will not be allowed to harm them. Even if Joffrey is not Robert's by blood, Robert raised that boy as if he were. Killing children would be monstrous. Renly shook his head. Stannis is not a cruel man, but he is unyielding. If he believes it he will do it, no matter how monstrous. He sees the law as iron, and if the law says traitors must be punished, he'll carry it out. The question is, who does he consider traitors? By his reading, the queen, her children, and any who aided their deception might be subject to punishment. He will argue that to keep them alive is to allow a potential claimant to linger. The realm's memory is long, as is the Lannisters' capacity for vengeance. Ned felt a chill at these words. I can't let him do that. Renly shrugged. Then you may find yourself at odds with Stannis, ironically enough. I only warn you, your sense of honor might clash with his sense of justice. Ned let out a breath. I appreciate the warning, but we'll address that when Stannis is here. For now, the queen and her children remain under my protection. That afternoon, Ned stepped into the queen's guarded chambers, a portion of Maegor's holdfast the gold cloaks had secured under direct orders. Outside stood half a dozen men in black and gold cloaks, halberds in hand. The steel bar across the door clanged as they lifted it for him. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lavender, though the windows were shuttered from the outside, letting in only thin slices of daylight. A pair of smaller rooms opened off the main chamber, presumably housing Myrcella and Tommen. Joffrey had been separated from his siblings. He was older, surlier, and required stricter watch. Cersei herself sat on a padded bench near a table, wearing a simple crimson gown without the usual lion-embroidered finery. The lines around her eyes seemed harsher, as though these weeks of confinement had aged her. She looked up at Ned with the same mixture of contempt and defiance that she'd shown since her detention. I did not ask for you, Lord Stark, she said coolly. What do you want? Ned drew closer, dismissing the gold cloaks who had accompanied him. He kept the door open for the sake of some small caution but allowed them to stand just out of earshot. My lady, I've come to inquire if you need anything. I know this confinement is difficult, but I mean what I said. I will keep you and your children safe. Cersei's lips curved in a mocking smile. Safety. Yes, you speak of it as if it's an honorable gift you bestow. But what is the difference between your safety and captivity? The walls close in on us either way. Ned sighed. I do not relish this. You must know that. But until the issue of succession is settled, your presence is a threat. Your father is on the march. Word will have reached him that you and Joffrey are imprisoned. Cersei's eyes flicked up, a proud gleam in them. Not imprisoned, detained. Let us keep the charade going. After all, if you truly imprisoned me, it would cause quite the scandal among the lords who still wonder if you do this for your own advancement. Ned tried to remain calm. If I were doing this for my own advancement, I would have had you locked in a tower cell or worse. My lady, I have offered you every courtesy. She laughed, a bitter note in her voice. Yes, so courteous to tear down my son's birthright in front of half the realm. So courteous to proclaim him a bastard. You are so certain of your precious truth. Never mind that truth can be sharper than any sword. Now Tywin's armies ride. Did you truly believe he would do otherwise? He fixed her with a steady gaze. I knew he might. Change is nothing. Joffrey is not Robert's child, nor are Myrcella and Tommen. I am sorry for the consequences, but the realm could not labor under that lie any longer. Cersei's expression twisted with anger, but there was also a glimpse of something else in her eyes, fear, or maybe desperation. What do you plan to do with us once Stannis arrives? Ned spoke slowly, measuring each word. That depends on Stannis. My hope is we can arrange an honorable exile for your children. If the realm accepts Stannis as king, I see no need for needless bloodshed. But if Stannis insists on harsher measures, then I will counsel against it with all my power. She studied him. You say that so easily, as though your counsel will matter, but you underestimate Stannis's thirst for vengeance. He might have you executed if you stand in his way. Or perhaps he'll kill me and the children before you can protest. Ned felt the weight of that possibility like a stone in his chest. He will not do so lightly, he said at last. and I will not stand idly by." Cersei shook her head, turning away. "A Northman's honor. It's wasted in King's Landing." She rose from the bench, crossing to a window where thin spears of sunlight penetrated. "If you wish to call your confinement safety, so be it. I only pray you realize too late that Tywin Lannister is not a man you can negotiate with from a position of moral superiority. He only respects power, and you have not enough of it." Ned decided not to argue further. He inclined his head and withdrew from the chamber, leaving Cersei alone in that faint shaft of light. When he stepped into the corridor, he nodded for the gold cloaks to rebar the door. His heart felt heavy. Her words gnawed at him. Tywin only respects power. Ned had no illusions about his ability to outmaneuver Tywin Lannister in the dance of war. His best hope remained Stannis arriving swiftly to stabilize the realm. The next few days blurred in anxious waiting. Ravens flew to Casterly Rock with the invitation for a parley, but no immediate response came. The city braced itself, uncertain whether Tywin's forces would appear first or Stannis' fleet. Whispers moved through the streets, rumor upon rumor, from Joffrey's possible beheading to talk of a fresh plague in the west. Each rumor had the potential to spark panic, so Ned was forced to expend considerable effort ensuring the gold cloaks patrolled regularly, placating the masses, and overseeing the price of bread so the small folk would not starve. It felt like a precarious balancing act. He met with Sansa and Arya on the third day, summoning them to his solar in the Tower of the Hand. Sansa was pale, her blue eyes wide with worry. Arya seemed restless, wearing a scowl of boredom, her dark hair cropped shorter than when they'd arrived. Ned considered how best to reassure them. "My girls," he said gently, "there is much uncertainty, but be assured you are safe here. The city watch is under my command. No harm will come to you." Arya's gaze flicked to the window. "I hear the talk in the corridors, Father. They say you've locked the Queen and the Prince away. Are we at war?" Ned looked at her in surprise. She was still so young, only 10. But her eyes told him that she'd grown wise to the dangers of King's Landing in far too short a time. "Not yet," he replied softly. "We are trying to avoid that. But there are men outside these walls, men allied to House Lannister, who might choose to make war. When Lord Stannis arrives, we hope he will bring order." Sansa twisted her fingers together, voice trembling. "If Joffrey is not the true prince, does that mean my betrothal is broken? I was supposed to marry him." She swallowed hard. "I don't want to, not now, but it's all so sudden. Joffrey used to. I thought he was." Ned placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I understand, Sansa. You were promised to him under different circumstances, but that promise is no longer valid. I release you from any sense of obligation. You will not be forced to wed him." Relief mingled with confusion on Sansa's face. She had once adored Joffrey, or so she believed, but now, with the scandal and violence, it was clear she saw him in a new and troubling light. She looked down, blinking fast. "I see." Arya scowled again. "Good. He was a stupid prince anyway." She fiddled with an imaginary sword at her hip. Ned gave her a mild, reproving look. "Mind your manners, Arya. This is still a fragile time." She shrugged. "I'll mind them when we're safe in Winterfell." Ned hesitated. He wished he could send his daughters back north at once, away from the intrigues of the capital. But with the road so uncertain, Tywin's forces in the Riverlands, and no telling what bribes or bandits might await, he couldn't risk it yet. Soon, perhaps, when matters are settled and it's safe to travel, I'll send you home under heavy guard. Arya looked away, not arguing. Sansa glanced out the window as well, face tight. Ned sensed their longing for the far-off safety of Winterfell, for the Godswood with its quiet pools and rustling leaves. But for now, they were all bound to King's Landing by duty, or by the illusions that might keep the realm from ripping itself apart. By the 5th day after the council meeting, the tension in the city was near boiling. Still, there was no sign of Stannis or Tywin, only a trickle of contradictory rumors. Ned's sleep became fitful, plagued by dreams of Robert's death and the war he'd tried to prevent. Littlefinger reported that some of the merchants were sending their valuables out of the city, anticipating siege or sacking. The gold cloaks grew restless, worried they might soon be forced to fight trained Western knights. It was near noon on that 5th day when the first shout rang out from the city walls. Sails were spotted to the southeast, a mass of them. From the ramparts, the watchers called it a great fleet, many bearing the crowned stag banner of House Baratheon. Word reached Ned in the Great Hall, where he sat hearing a petition from a frightened merchant about last night's thefts. He stood abruptly, nearly toppling his chair, and excused himself. Within minutes, the entire Red Keep was in an uproar. Stannis had come at last. Ned gathered Renly, Barristan, and a retinue of City Watch officers to ride to the docks, where the ships would likely disembark. A flurry of onlookers made their way to the harbor district, the cobbled streets jammed with spectators. Some cheered for the arrival of Baratheon might, while others watched in anxious silence, uncertain if this spelled salvation or doom. When Ned reached the waterfront, the scene was chaotic. Longships, war galleys, and troop transports crowded the harbor. He spied the black stag sigil on many sails. Dockworkers scrambled to clear moorings. Baratheon soldiers, clad in sturdy steel and bearing the fiery heart and stag standard, an emblem that Ned recognized as Stannis' personal sigil, worshipping the Lord of Light, though not all of them would share that faith, began to disembark. There must have been thousands of them, marching onto the piers,